Go ahead and have a seat. Grab those Bibles. We're going to go to Ruth, all the way back in the Old Testament towards the beginning. We're kind of changing gears for a few weeks from our study of 1 John. Thanks for being here. You guys look great. Most of you. And so,
It's dark out here.
oh, it's dark out here. That's what it is. Okay. It's so, no, you guys look great. We are going to be just having one sermon after another that's all kind of just separate, not a series for this month, as we're not in the life group cycle. And so this morning we're going to be, there we go, talking about, well, we're kind of like splitting right off of what we looked at last week, which was 1 John, and God is love. There we go. And so we're talking about his redeeming love this morning, the tapestry of life. It's kind of cut off there. Uh-oh, I bet you every slide may be cut off this morning. We'll see here in a minute. And so it's the never-ending moving from around and around in our electronics. And so thanks for being here. I've said that already, but you guys really, it's what a great worship, just a time to worship the Lord. I feel encouraged already by you guys this morning and your singing. And so this part's easy, isn't it? It's like talking about God. If you go, Max, and I wanted to mention Max, raise your hand, Max. Max is thinking about being one of our participants in the Hope program coming up here that we start up again this summer. And he taught our Bible class actually this morning. He's preaching in Griffithville, Arkansas, and taught our Bible class and looked at Ephesians 1. And I'm going to take us to Ephesus right now. If you go to Ephesus today, there's lots of great ruins and really an awesome place to walk around and think, well, there's Paul, there's where they were shouting, there's the theater, there's the library. The library walls are still up, an incredible library that they had back then in the first century. And you do all of that, and then you get outside the ruins, and there's this place of, it's a carpet manufacturing place. And don't think Georgia and carpet that we buy in America. Think carpets, like little ones. Like if you go to our house, we have a small green one that's about this big on the wall. You hang them on the walls quite frequently. We also have a big one, more like a 8 by 10 or something that we bought in India. And it's probably, oh goodness, it's 40 years old now. And long after Sheila and I have died, that carpet will still be moving on, doing its thing, because they make these things to last a long time. And so anyway, back to Ephesus. The one in India that we purchased, of course, was made in India, and it's wool. But the one in Ephesus, outside of Ephesus, there are the old ruins. This place, there's a bunch of ladies, and it's like, they broken homes, whatever it might be. They came out of children's homes, or they were married and their husbands died. Just different stories for each of them. And so they come to this home for widow ladies, basically, and for ladies that have never had a family. And they work making carpets. And so you go in the room where they have, it's silk. So they take the silk, and it's just raw silk, and they're boiling over here and doing stuff, and there's like all this raw silk going everywhere, and the place is a mess. Because number one, it's in the middle of Turkey, and number two, it's just, they don't have a lot of money. I mean, they're trying to do this thing, and so trying to develop this industry where they are making this, and there is stuff everywhere, and there's the big looms that they're working on, and there's like all these ladies, and you have, it's just a mess, and there's steam and just all the stuff involved. And of course there's dyes and all kinds of different things to make the silk into thread and then dye it, and then they're by hand making these carpets. And so going away at it by hand. And so you take one of those carpets, and that's made of silk like that with thousands of knots per inch. And I have seen them all over the world. I have seen carpets made in Persia. I've seen them made in India. and I'll see them in a house, and we're like, you're walking into this person's house, and we're having a Bible study, and we're having tea, and there's kids running around, and there's these carpets laying on the ground. And then you see one of the kids spill tea, and all kinds of things going on. And you're just like, okay, this is the life of a family, and they've been walking on these carpets, and you're looking at the carpets and going, well, yeah, they're a little bit dirty, and there's dirt, and this, that, and the other. And then you're talking to the family, and you're like, oh, well, nice pattern on that carpet. And they're like, yeah, that was my great-grandfather's. That carpet's 120 years old. And you're like, oh, yeah, this isn't like the carpet we buy in America, right? Because it's got thousands and thousands of little knots. It's like, you look at the backside of that carpet. You take the one that they're making in Ephesus, and there's like rows and rows, like little tiny knots, and there's like little cutouts, and it just, you're like, wow, what is that? And you can't even tell what it is. It's just like, it doesn't even look like anything, and maybe they've stitched in some words, with a little tag or whatever. It's just like, what is this thing? And of course, it's all just kind of a pale brown. And then you turn that carpet over, right? And you're like, oh, right? Oh, it's this intricate pattern that they've all done by hand, right? With all the different thread colors. And you're like, wow, and this thing lasts 100+ years. And you're going, okay, which side is it? Is it the knot side, or is it the carpet side that we're going to display? Like, which one are we going to show? Well, if you come to our house, you can look on our wall, and guess what? We're not showing you the knot side. It's the pretty side, right? With all the intricate pattern. And if I pull up the India one that I've got rolled, we just keep it rolled up now. And if I unroll it and take it out, its thing, and unroll it, you'll be like, oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, somebody really knew what they were doing to make that kind of little lions and all the patterns that are on there of this carpet. And so that is our story this morning. As always, if you understand the carpet concept, you understand your life, all of our lives, and you really understand how God works. Because God works just like those carpets. And so for me, of course, for Sheila and I, it's one of those things. It's like we walk into Ephesus. It's like I could see James there, James Wilson, because you walk in from the outskirts of Ephesus on the main road, and there's the School of Pharmacy, 1st century, but it's got the little medicine and the snake, and you're like, they studied pharmacy there 2,000 years ago, and Paul went right by it. Right? And then you're like, somebody here heard the gospel and may have worked at that pharmacy and thought, how can I help people? Well, I can help them with medicine, right? Or whatever it was, whatever they were doing in 1st century Ephesus, right? And then I look at those women, and it's like, wow, they're making these carpets. And it's like, that's the way God works. It's like we're connected in so many more ways than we think. All right, let's go to Ruth now. So what does this have to do with our text in Ruth? Here we go. This is the way life works. God is at work. We just struggle to see the picture. We struggle to connect the dots. Because most of the time, you and I are all absorbed in the working side of the carpet. It's like our lives look like a bunch of knots. And we're like, wow, it's ugly. I mean, they're not pretty. And it's like, that's just the way it is. And you see all the mistakes and all the little strange things they did in the pattern. But then you turn it over and you see the way God sees things. And so we look at chapter 1 now of Ruth. So I'm going to have to refresh your memory here because it's been a long time, hasn't it? Think about Ruth for a moment. It's verse 6. So she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So we've got Naomi and Naomi's husband, and it's verse 1 of Ruth. It came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. So there's a famine in the land, and they have to leave their homeland and go find food, right? So they go to Moab, and so this guy takes his wife and he takes his 2 sons, and they journey, and they're in search of food. Verse 3. But unfortunately, Naomi, the wife's husband, dies, and she's left with her 2 sons. So they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other was Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then, of course, both the sons die. And the woman was, of course, this is a pretty sad situation. Both of her 2 children had died, her husband's died. There's not like major Social Security that's going to take care of her the rest of her life, and the rest of the story. So she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So here we go. We know the rest of the story. They go back to Israel. God takes care of them. Ruth's going to get married. She decides to stay with Naomi, and they live the rest of their lives in Israel and eating food, and she marries, right, and all of that. And so it all works out in the end. It's kind of a happy ending story. And it's right here in the Bible. And so there's all kinds of great lessons here for us, because I want us to look at the mechanism of it for a moment. And so like those carpets, God is at work, right? He's at work. We just focus on the knots most of the time. We're so wrapped up in the day-to-day stuff. We have this happen in our lives. We lose this job, or we go here and it's not what we thought, or we go do this thing. And all of that doesn't seem to work out. And so we start forgetting. And I have been guilty of it even this week. I am guilty of, I forget God is at work. And I should have thought that through, that God's at work. And so what do we get from this? Okay, here's our first thought. Primary versus secondary causes. It's like if we're not careful, we'll focus on the secondary cause. What's the secondary cause here? The secondary cause is there's a famine in the land of Israel, and Naomi's husband and 2 children have to journey to Moab. But that is not the story. It's never the story. And so the famine is the secondary cause of their journey. What's the primary cause? You know the primary cause. It would be God. And so God's the primary cause. And he works, or he restrains from working, or he's doing something in all these different areas of our lives. And he's the primary mover of things. The secondary cause was the famine. The primary cause is God. So that's what Ruth's book is all about. It's like this book is trying to tell us it's not like what you think. Does this mean God causes a lot of hardship and suffering in this world? Of course he does. Does God use evil to fulfill his plans? Of course he does. That's Ruth's point. It's like the book is saying, did he cause the famine that caused Naomi and her husband to leave in the first place? We'd say yes. Was he involved with the wonderful harvest which now blesses Israel that they hear about in Moab? Of course he is. He caused it both to be a famine as well as there to be a blessing of great crops. Why is he doing all of that? And so if we want to know the answer to that, we got to look at the primary instead of the secondary cause. And so to a person of faith, right, to us, what is it? The primary cause is always God, right? Did God cause all of this? Of course he did. All right, let's go to the next one. And it's way on down there. We're just going to keep going. Why did God get involved? Here we go. Number 2, only God knows the big picture, right? Most of the time, he's the only one that can see the carpet. You and I, we're not there. We're seeing the knots and we're seeing the stuff. We're seeing the famine. We read the story of Ruth and think, oh, there was this famine and they had to leave. And why'd they leave? Oh, they should have just stayed and maybe God would have worked it out. No, they had to go find food. And then there's great news and they go back. And so we see all the comings and goings of the secondary causes. And we've got to remember that only God knows the big picture. And we must trust that He has one. So Ruth, of course, gets us the clue there, right? And so if you go all the way to the end of the book, chapter 4, in the last part of Ruth, we get the big picture concept, don't we? We've got to trust that there actually is, and I'm going to do that, there we go, that we actually have God in control. That's the point. So the writer, of course, reminds us of this in the last few verses. Because we hear it, don't we? He does the summary. Now, after all of that, Naomi lived her life, and Ruth lived her life, and it's all grand. But then we hear these words, and the neighbor woman gave him a name. This is the child now that Naomi gets. So Ruth has a child, and they bring it to Naomi and lay it on her lap. And then these words are spoken. Then the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. Of course, it's Ruth, but they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So we get for a brief moment the other side of the carpet. With all the famine and all the stuff, it's like, okay, there's all this stuff. It's a great story, famine and love story, and we say it at weddings and all that kind of stuff. But it's secondary to the real story. The true story is, right, David's lineage. This is the start of how David's going to come about, and David, of course, is going to eventually have for us Jesus. So it's really the story of David. Well, it's really the story of Jesus. So when you put all the puzzle pieces together, we see David, or we see Jesus. So we have to ask, what is God doing? So the big picture stuff always works like that, right? It's like the puzzle pieces. You and I see the little jagged edge of a single puzzle piece, and the single puzzle piece has famine on it. Oh no, I've got to uproot my family and move to Moab. Don't really want to do that, but here we go. And so we see the single piece and we think, it's a difficult knot. It's a difficult piece. How's it going to fit in? And what's God doing? He's got the whole puzzle pieces all together, right? He's got the box. He's got the box with all the pieces, and He's going, this is what I'm making. Now, make your piece fit right there. And then He'll do all of this, right? He's got all this stuff going. So hold on to that, because we're going to build on that now. So now the next question. Why does God do this? Why is God doing all of this? He's doing all this because of the big picture. All right, now the last question though. But why does He make big pictures? What's His point? Why does He need to do all of this anyway? And this is our point for this lesson this morning, and our lesson's over. It is God works His works because of the need for redemption. Everything that we are reading is helping us see God's puzzle pieces all fit in for one thing: redemption. On the surface, the secondary causes seem to it's all just like, okay, there's famines, or there's this, or there's that. But in Ruth's time, what has going on? What's happening in Ruth's time? There needed to be a Boaz who would beget the next person, who would beget the next person. And we'd end up with David, right? So we need David to come about, but all of us need to be redeemed from sin as well. So it's just an ongoing story of redemption. It's like there has to be this redeeming thing that takes place. And so God's giving us, it's like in this story of Ruth, He's saying, you know what? Jesus never sinned, but He suffered for redemption. It's like, this is the way it works. I'm going to have you go through times in life where you suffer, or where bad things happen, or there's a knot, or something breaks, and you got to start over the thread, all because of redemption. And so that's our lesson. I like to illustrate it though, because I think we need to hear it just a little bit differently than the way Ruth has done it. And so I want us to kind of process this now, because what I've just said is true, that overall God is redeeming mankind from the terrible sin problem we have. But do we believe it? Do we live it? When difficult times come, do you stop and say, well, I just can't see the big picture, but I'm going to trust God anyway, that I'm going to go ahead and go through this? And so I don't know, do we? I think on an intellectual level, all of us understand Ruth long ago. This is like a lesson all of you've got. All of us have it, right? But I know that even though I have thought through this lesson once again, that I still miss it. And so I want us to see this. Consider Job. We're going to illustrate this in a whole bunch of different ways. The first one's Job. Job, and so listen to these words, because I think this is our point this morning. Job did not suffer because he was bad. So get back into the book of Job for a moment. Job was not bad. He was really an awesome follower of the Lord. He suffered because he was good. He didn't suffer so that God could test him to see if he was good. Did God know Job's heart? Of course he did. Did he need to test Job to learn that? No, God knew it. No, he suffered because God knew he was good and wanted to, and here's your word. It's one of the most important words in the Bible. Not as important as but it's a great word, right? It's like we have those really important words, like the word but, right? Because that's the word that transitions us away from us to God. But this word is also trying to do a similar thing. It's the word displayed. There it is. I've got it up here as demonstrated. He suffered because God knew he was good and wanted to demonstrate that to Satan, but also to us. It's like he wanted to tell Satan, I can have my glory displayed through people and ultimately through the church. So now let's leave Ruth for a moment. Go to John 9. We'll see this illustration, because Ruth puts us into the proper place to think about John 9. And so remember, John 9 is the story here of he was passing by, he saw a man born blind from birth. Verse 1 of John chapter 9. And so his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? And Jesus answered, it was neither. And how many times have you seen a person? We all scoff at these disciples. We're like, come on, disciples. That guy, it wasn't his fault that he was born blind from birth. How could it be his fault? He was just a little baby. He was born to parents. He was born blind. Of course it wasn't because he sinned. But they asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? And you're like, who would believe such nonsense? When's the last time you looked at somebody who's down and out and thought it's not their fault? They had no control. It was all somebody else's fault. I guarantee it. A bunch of us go, if they hadn't have made that poor decision to do drugs, they wouldn't be in this situation. How many of us are guilty of that? How many of us see a person and go, yep, if they'd have just made the proper choice when they were 12, they wouldn't be in this mess today. You're right. They probably wouldn't. See, we're doing the exact same thing the disciples are doing. We just can't help it. We just think it's got to be this guy's fault or his parents. Jesus answered, it's neither that this man sinned nor his parents. It's like, have you still not heard the lesson of Ruth? It was in order that the works of God, and here's our word, might be displayed in him. See, it's the carpet. God makes all the knots, and then he turns the carpet over, and you go, oh, what a great thing. And so he's doing that here. He's like, okay, let me do a little bit of displaying. And then he displays God's glory right there in this blind man. And so we see it all the way back in Ruth. So what does this tell us? So here we go. These little things down here. God uses his church to bring his redeeming love to light. That's how he does it. He wants to bring things to light. So you and I are in the display business. That's what we do. We display God's redeeming love. And so like Ruth, we have to be fitted together, and he's going to make you go through. I don't know what he's going to have you go through. It could be pain and suffering. It could be some really joyful occasion. It could be being born blind. It could be having a famine. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be a bunch of stuff, because that's the way life is. It's just messy. It's what we say, right? It's just the way it is. God's going to do all of that because there's cosmic significance in the suffering of Ruth. And there's cosmic significance when you go through the same stuff. There's something happening. I don't know what it is, but when you suffer or go through events in your life, there's something going on that God wants to make display His great love, His redeeming love. And so that's where we end. Okay, let's wrap it up now, because this is the end of the story here for us today. So I love I better read it because it goes together there. And so when you see just all the different stories that unfold in the Old Testament, think like that for a moment. What is God doing to display His really fancy carpet? Like, what is He doing that's going to display something significant? And so I love the way these two books do it. Ruth and Esther, they kind of go together in some ways, don't they? So Ruth, it's almost like this. It's like Ruth gave us a full puzzle. You know those jigsaw puzzles, right? I'll put one up there maybe. And then Esther, on the other hand, Esther doesn't do that for us. Let me read Esther's ending. Ruth ends with, oh, by the way, King David's going to come about because of this woman's decisions. It's like David will be born because this woman suffered. Do you see the cosmic significance? Then he goes to Esther, and Esther ends like this. Here's the way Esther ends. King Xerxes taxed the land and all the accomplishments. It's like, he says, a king that none of us have ever known. And he taxed a bunch of people, and then he's long gone, but a bunch of it's written in some books that you and I will never read because the books are long gone. Oh, and by the way, there was a faithful guy named Mordecai, and he's long gone because he died. And it's like, that's the end of the story. Nothing else. We don't get anything else from Esther. It just ends. And you're left going, wait a minute, the puzzle's not finished. Like, what does this have to do with everything? What's the cosmic significance of Esther? It's like, who cares about Xerxes? Okay, Mordecai was a nice guy, but I want to hear more. It's like looking at the puzzle and you only have jagged edges around the edge. It's like, it's just not ending right. It ends with nothing. It's just about some king we never knew and some books that are long gone and a guy who lived and died. Then nothing. It's like the sides of the puzzle. It just ends. And so we're like, wow, it's such a strange, it's like it's just not right. And so here's what I want you to do. You're going to have to go into jigsaw puzzles for a moment. So I want you to imagine jigsaw puzzle. So work with me here. This is the last illustration and we're finished. But this is where I want us to see this. So think about jigsaw puzzles. You get a box of puzzle pieces, and some of us get boxes of 12 or 20, and some of you get boxes of 1,000 or 2,000. And so we put together the little pieces, right? And you've got a box, right? When we work on the puzzle, we expect to finish the puzzle. And what do puzzles have? They have edges with clear parameters, right? It's like, here's your puzzle, you see it on the box, and then you make your puzzle, and what does it have? Matter of fact, the picture on the box, of course, gives you the completed picture, what it's supposed to look like, and typically, which puzzle pieces do you do first? Maybe you're someone who's really, maybe one of you is an expert, and maybe you do the very center piece first, and then you work out. But probably not. Right? Probably you don't do that. They've started making these puzzles now that have the broken edges. And you're like, no, not for me, right? I was like, no, I'm not going to do those either. But you just think, it's like these, so you do the whole outside of the puzzle first with all the edges. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to do the rest of the puzzle now. And so, of course, the edges, the outer perimeter, right, they're all flat, right? They're all, it's like sharp edge. It's like it's a line. There's no little cutouts. So that you expect that to be the end of the puzzle. And of course, we look for those first. I look for the corners first. I've got a puzzle of 12 pieces and 4 corners, and I'm going to find the 4 pieces first, right? I've been in Lucas Land too long. But anyway, so that's what we do. Now just imagine for a moment that there's a jigsaw puzzle that you're working on, and the whole time that you're working on this jigsaw puzzle, you don't know, and you have no idea where it will clearly end. You're putting the puzzle pieces together, but there's no clear, sharp boundaries. There's no box with the picture. There's just like cut pieces as far as the eye can see. So as you put all that together, like this one, with all the jagged edges, it's like, once you put those last 3 pieces in, what does that puzzle cry out for? What does that puzzle need? It needs another puzzle. It needs that piece to fit in a bigger puzzle that has maybe some defined edges. See, do you see where I'm going with this? It's like you get frustrated, right? Because there's no outside perimeter pieces. You're putting puzzle pieces together furiously in your life. You're like getting all the pieces and lining them up, but there's never a straight edge. There's never an ending. It's just more puzzle pieces. And you are thinking, how can I see the completed picture? Can you? You can't. It's never going to happen because there's a bigger puzzle and you're not seeing it. So your edges are left all those different ways because someday somebody else, and we would say the primary cause of that would be God, is going to take your puzzle piece and fit it into a bigger puzzle. And then somebody's going to go, oh, look at this big puzzle. Like, okay, they lived their lives. They had famines. They went out and hunted down crops. They had a whole love story. There's like all this stuff. It's a great story, right? But really, the story is about David coming about. Oh, but we know that's not the finished puzzle. That's puzzle number 2. There's puzzle number 3 because someday there's going to be a guy named Jesus who comes about from David. So we get this unfinished feeling, don't we? Like in the book of Esther, it's like, well, what's the point of these 10 chapters? They all die. I mean, what's the whole point? It's like, what's the point of this story? As if there's something more to come. It's like we're left with jagged edges in Esther. Ruth gives us kind of a little puzzle piece with some little bit of straight lines. Oh, okay, good. Okay, David, I get it. It's like, okay, I see how God's fitting this in. And then I get Jesus someday. So I get some straight lines and kind of a picture. But Esther's just like, poof, they're all dead and it's gone. I want something bigger. And that's the spiritual lesson of this lesson. It's like God's at work in your lives. And he's doing all this stuff in each of our individual lives. And he's working with his unseen hand all behind the scenes. And he's doing some big picture. And I don't know what it is. And you don't know what it is. And it has undefined perimeters. And our puzzle pieces, it's like, I love this thought. It's like we do this little thing. It's like, I can remember several years ago, Devin and Nolani are right there, so I'll use them. You meet a couple and here they are and okay, what are you doing? Well, I may be coming here to work on piano, and you're like, okay, and what are we doing when we introduce ourselves to people and like, oh, you're Christians, and what are we doing? We're trying to fit the puzzle pieces together. It's like we're like, do we fit? Are we like people that believe in the same God? Do we like understand how God works? So we're fitting little puzzle pieces together. And then years go by and you're like, oh, that's the way God works. It's like, oh, isn't it true? It's like all of us as a body here at Longmont, we're like a big puzzle. And we've got some really strange shaped puzzle pieces. You know who you are. And some of us are fairly, not so creviced and, and we kind of like, and it's like, how in the world would you take a bunch of people like us? We got people in here that really enjoy needlework and putting together puzzles. I don't do puzzles. I just don't have the patience for it or something. I don't know. And I'm never going to, don't be praying for patience for me. But anyway, and then there's some of us that, right, but then God starts putting puzzle pieces together. And this thing happened. Why are you in Longmont? Well, because this school did this, or this company decided to offer me a job. And you're like, yeah, it just so happened that a company offered me a job in Longmont. And you're like, no, there's somebody doing something. There's a secondary cause and there's a primary cause. And so the writer, of course, right? In Esther, it's like, I'll let you kind of figure it out. But Ruth gives us a little bit more of the bigger puzzle. And so this little puzzle piece called Ruth kind of like, bink, oh, she's going to have David because she decided to go with Naomi. She could have said, I'm staying in Moab, go forth and prosper like the other daughter-in-law did, and Naomi would have had no grandchildren, and who else would have never been born? David. But Ruth made a decision, right? So that's our lesson. Esther, of course, is like, oh, who knows, right? How does that all fit in? It's left for you and I to kind of see the big picture, right? Yet, in chapter 10, of course, we don't see it, right? We step back and go, oh, Esther just saved the entire Jewish population, including the lineage of David, to actually be saved from the evil Persians so that Jesus could be born someday. So it's a lot bigger picture, of course. So what about you and I? Where do you fit in on this? It's like, how do we do this? So here's what I think we'll end it with. Romans 5:8. Look, if you ever get a chance, just go through the Bible and start looking for that word displayed or demonstrated. And you'll suddenly go, oh, this is what God likes to do. He really likes to demonstrate his own love for us. In this, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's Romans 5:8. So God wants to demonstrate his love through you. What's the pivot point? You and I have to trust him. That whenever this happens in our lives, I just have to trust that God is in control and he's fitting puzzle pieces together. And that sometimes, all right, you know how you do a puzzle and we're like, you do this puzzle and you get something really good going and they all seem to fit together and you kind of journey over here for a while in the big map of the puzzle and you're like, wow, this is all working. And then out pops this piece and you're like, I have no idea where it goes. I just can't figure this out. I'm just going to set that aside for a while. And it's like, we just have to trust God, don't we? We don't know the big picture. Sometimes it's easy. It's like you look back and go, oh yeah, God was doing that. Oh, look at what he did in my life. Oh, it's so easy. And other times we're like, I don't know how this picture is because we're still looking at the knots. So the other side, of course, is a beautiful picture of God demonstrating his love. And he wants to do that through you today. You are his demonstration, his display. When we get to heaven, there's not going to be any display cabinets. There's just going to be one giant display area. And guess what God's going to have displayed there? He's going to have you standing right there. You want to see a display of my love? She got into heaven. That's my love. And so, how are you displaying it in your life? Do you trust him to do that? Because he really, really likes displaying his love through you. Because you're that special to him. And so that's where we can end this lesson this morning. Thanks for being here. Thanks for trusting the Lord. Keep trusting him. Because, as always, do we have a world of people in Longmont that need to see God's love? Yes. There's a whole bunch of people who desperately need it. So we need to display it. Let's stand and sing.